Scientists brought back a living sample from Mars, something that was meant to be the discovery of the century and a milestone in science. But it turned into humanity's biggest mistake in space. None of the crew members knew that the creature they were awakening would become the sole survivor of this mission. Hello, this is Filmoro, and today we're following the recap of the movie Life. A team of astronauts aboard the International Space Station is preparing to examine Martian soil samples. They hope to find signs of life on the red planet, but none of them knew that this tiny sample could change everything in the lab. Hugh carefully picks up a sample from the container and places it under the microscope. He sees an almost fossilized organism, something resembling a single-celled organism. Hugh tries to revive it, but it shows no reaction. Then he simulates Proterozoic-like conditions close to Earth, and to everyone's astonishment, the organism starts moving. Hugh can't stop himself from laughing. They have discovered the first signs of life from another planet. As a global event, NASA gives school students the chance to name the creature, and they choose the name Calvin. But no one knew that this tiny organism would become the greatest threat to the station. Hugh realizes that this new organism is highly intelligent and can interact with its surroundings. Calvin's initial growth amazes and excites everyone, but a few days later, the lab's emergency alarm goes off. The team discovers that, due to a clamp malfunction, the air pressure inside Calvin's chamber temporarily dropped, and he no longer moves, as if he had fallen asleep. Hugh makes every effort to bring Calvin back, believing that this organism might help treat stem cells and incurable diseases. He decides to use a very low-voltage electrical stimulator to revive Calvin. Suddenly, Calvin moves with unexpected strength, destroys the stimulator, and starts crushing Hugh's hands. The protective gloves that the team relied on prove useless. Calvin grips the glass from one side while entwining Hugh's fingers on the other. No one is allowed to enter the lab's isolated chamber. The sound of Hugh's bones breaking echoes throughout the lab, and he loses consciousness from the pain. Everyone thought Calvin was now safe and no longer a threat, but he was smarter than that. Using the broken stimulator, Calvin tears through the glove and moves toward the lab mouse. In an instant, he wraps around it and swallows it whole. In an instant, everyone realized this creature obeys no rules anymore, and now everyone is in immediate mortal danger. Rory decided to open the lab door while Calvin was busy eating the mouse to save Hugh, but at the last moment, Calvin attacked again and grabbed Rory's leg. Miranda had to close the lab chamber to protect the team. Rory smashed an oxygen glass and struck Calvin with it to free his leg. Once free, Ekaterina ordered Calvin to be killed. Rory grabbed a flamethrower, but Sho reminded him that the fuel was limited. Rory aimed all the firepower at Calvin, but the flames had no effect and only made it retreat. The fuel gradually ran out, yet Calvin survived. All eyes scanned the ceiling through the glass, and suddenly, at the exact moment no one expected, Calvin leapt over Rory and without hesitation, rolled into his mouth. Rory was gone, but the creature not only survived, it had grown stronger, and now nothing could stop its hunger. Sho and Ekaterina went to the command room to shut down all the oxygen chambers, but the system was malfunctioning, and they had to do it manually. By the time they closed the last chamber, Calvin had escaped. Ekaterina went to the control room to report the events to Earth, but the connection suddenly cut out. She went outside the station to check the transmitter, and saw it had become extremely hot. When she opened the cooler compartment, she realized that Calvin had consumed all the liquid inside, and the chamber was dry. Suddenly, Calvin burst out of the compartment and landed on Ekaterina's head. The pressure on her body damaged the coolant source, and liquid flooded into her suit. Ekaterina tried desperately to get Calvin off her, but the creature had grown bigger and stronger, and there was no way to get rid of it. In the end, Ekaterina died from suffocation, and the station gradually became a cage for its victims. The team tried everything they could to prevent Calvin from entering the station. The only way Calvin could get in was through the thruster vents. Sho realized, if Calvin approaches any of the thrusters, we can turn them on. The heat produced will prevent him from entering. Calvin tested each thruster compartment one by one until the low fuel warning went off and the station went off its orbit. The remaining fuel had to be used to bring the station back to orbit, and they could no longer stop Calvin from entering. Hugh said, if Calvin doesn't get oxygen, he will die. We just need to trap him in one of the compartments and remove the oxygen. As Hugh apologized to the others for reviving Calvin, he suddenly lost consciousness and his heart stopped. Dr. David and Miranda administered an electric shock, and Hugh regained consciousness. But Miranda's gaze fell on Hugh's leg. Something was moving under his pants. When Miranda pulled up Hugh's pants, they saw Calvin feeding on his leg. Miranda used the shock device on Calvin to separate him from Hugh. With more feeding, Calvin rapidly transformed into a deadly and powerful monster. They tried to escape into one of the compartments to trap Calvin behind them. David and Miranda fled, but Sho entered the sleep compartment to avoid being caught and closed the door. With his blood-red eyes, Calvin saw Sho, and fear consumed him. Then Calvin moved toward the scent of blood. David and Miranda tracked Calvin's path through the monitors. The tracker from Hugh's leg, eaten by Calvin, guided his movement. Calvin moved toward Hugh to feed again. David closed the compartment, and Miranda began evacuating the oxygen. Now the moment of decision has come. Can they contain Calvin before he becomes fully grown and uncontrollable, or will everyone become the next victims? Everything was going well, until a spacecraft was sent from Earth. David thought they had come to help, but Miranda explained, "When I was on Earth, I personally approved a directive that if anything happened to this experiment, we would either be quarantined or discarded, and now they are pushing us into space so we won't reach Earth along with Calvin." The spacecraft collided with the space station. Sho, thinking they had come to rescue them, exited the compartment, but moved straight toward where Calvin was. Miranda tried to warn Sho through her communicator to change course, but she couldn't establish contact. Miranda and David rushed toward Sho, hoping to save him, but Calvin attacked again and killed Sho. In the end, Miranda and David managed to escape the compartment where Calvin was and closed the door on the creature. The spacecraft sent from Earth destroyed the entire space station and pushed them into space. David checked one of the computers and realized that their vital resources were rapidly depleting and the temperature was dropping drastically. But since the thrusters had been turned on earlier, instead of drifting into space, in 39 minutes they would collide with Earth, and the only one who could survive the impact was Calvin. Now it was time to think about saving Earth. David told Miranda, "We have two rescue ships, A and B, with default trajectories toward Earth. If I can lure Calvin into compartment A using the oxygen canisters as bait and close the door, I can change the flight path. You will enter compartment B and head toward Earth. This way, we can make sure Calvin doesn't reach Earth." Using the oxygen canisters, David guided Calvin toward spacecraft A and closed the door. Then he signaled Miranda to board spacecraft B. Both ships exited the space station, and Miranda began reporting all the events to the black box. Suddenly, a piece of the destroyed space station collided with Miranda's spacecraft, diverting its path into space. Inside spacecraft A, David struggled to manually take the control lever and redirect the path toward space. But Calvin's strong grip on his hands caused him to lose control. They fell into the water. Unfortunately, a boat was nearby. When the crew saw the spacecraft, they tried to pull David out and open the ship's door. But Calvin was still alive, and now a single wild creature held the fate of Earth in its hands. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to hit that like button. And most importantly, make sure you subscribe right now, so you never miss the next movie recap. I've got 6 playlists from different genres, and I add new movies every single month. You can see them right here on the end screen. Hit subscribe first, then pick a playlist, and keep the adventure going.